It doesn't really feel like we're being impeached. The country is doing better than ever before. We did nothing wrong. We did nothing wrong. And we have tremendous support in the Republican Party like we've never had before. Nobody's ever had this kind of support.
That was President Trump gloating about Republican support the first time he was impeached. He's about to be impeached again, and that Republican support is showing major signs of slipping this morning. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe. It is Wednesday, January 13th. Along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have White House reporter for the Associated Press, Jonathan Lemire, co-founder and CEO of Axios, Jim VandeHei, and conservative lawyer, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, and a contributing columnist to the Washington Post, George Conway, joins us this morning. Well, a lot to get to, Joe. I think the first we should start with is that Donald Trump is expected to become the first U.S. president to be impeached twice after Vice President Mike Pence informed at this point the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that he would not go forward with the 25th Amendment to remove Trump from office. In a letter to Speaker Pelosi just hours before the House passed a resolution urging Pence to invoke the 25th, the vice president wrote that such action is not in the best interest of our nation and would set a, quote, terrible precedent. I question his oath of office at this point, but that is what he did. The House convenes at 9 a.m. Debate on the impeachment resolution is set for 12:30. The vote will be around 3 p.m. today. Just one House Republican, Illinois, Adam Kinzinger, voted in support of the vice president invoking the 25th Amendment. However, there are at least 5 Republicans, including Kinzinger, who have come out in support of today's vote to impeach President Trump. Liz Cheney, the number 3 Republican in the House, along with Fred Upton, John Katko, and Jamie Herrera Butler, will all vote to impeach the president. House Republican leaders do not plan to encourage Republican members to vote against impeachment, a change from the first impeachment of the president. The White House believes that by the time the House votes this afternoon, there will be 24 Republicans who will ultimately come out in support of impeaching Trump. On the Senate side, the New York Times is reporting that Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has told associates that he believes President Trump committed impeachable offenses. People familiar with his thinking tell the Times that McConnell is pleased that Democrats are moving to impeach Trump, believing that it will make it easier to finally purge him from the party. The New York Times' Jonathan Martin, who co-authored that report, tweeted yesterday that a Senate Republican aide said he thinks there were about 20 Republicans, give or take, who were open to a conviction. And that was before publishing the piece on Mitch McConnell. Sources tell Axios that there's a better than 50-50 chance that McConnell himself will vote to convict Trump in an impeachment trial. A top Republican close to McConnell said, quote, the Senate institutional loyalists are fomenting a counter-revolution to Donald Trump.
George Conway, a lot to digest there as a former Republican, a conservative, Liz Cheney, Mitch McConnell, many others considering voting to impeach Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump goes to Alamo, Texas, just to make sure that nothing is lost on his supporters, what he thinks they should be doing in these final days of his administration, and refuses to accept any responsibility for the insurrection against the United States government that he inspired last week. Where are we right now with Donald Trump in these final days?
It reminds me a lot, frankly, of August 1974, after the Supreme Court ordered Nixon to produce the tapes and after the smoking gun tape came out. I mean, his support is collapsing the way we saw Nixon's support collapse in a matter of days back then. And I think, there's going to be, well, no matter whether or not he gets removed before his term of office ends or not, he's leaving in complete disgrace, as Nixon did. but there's going to be a big difference. And Nixon, when I don't know if you remember, I mean, you were the same age as I remember watching what happened when Nixon left that day, August 9, 1974, and watching all morning. And you saw some contrition, you saw some regret, you saw some sadness and sorrow for a man who actually did, unlike Donald Trump, love his country and want to do right by the country, even though he made some serious mistakes and broke some major laws. You don't see that with Trump. And one of the things you're not going to see is any sympathy for Donald Trump, the way there was some sympathy for Nixon when he left Washington as a broken man. This man, Donald Trump, because he's a psychopath, a man who could gloat and watch in glee as the Capitol was ransacked and attacked and as people's lives were threatened. This psychopath is never going to have, he's going to be a pariah for the rest of his life. And there may be some Republicans who still support him now, but those Republicans are the Republicans, if you can call them that, or you can call them conservatives at all, who seek some kind of an authoritarian leader who's all powerful. And he's leaving in absolute weakness. He can't even tweet at us this morning.
Can't tweet at us, can't upload a YouTube video, can do very little, can't even send emails out to his supporters, Willie. And George is right. I do remember Nixon, August 1974, as a child, but I understood actually more about it as I grew older. And I also understood that when the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that he had to turn over the tapes, Nixon understood immediately that we lived in a constitutional system of checks and balances. He knew where this was going, and he knew that it was in the best interest of the country to resign. That's something, obviously, that Donald Trump's never been interested in, and he never will be interested in. What is in the best interest of this country? That's why Ben Sasse and others are reporting that he was gleefully watching the riots take place at the United States Capitol, gleefully cheering on the insurrection, gleefully cheering on the beating and the overrunning of Capitol Hill police officers, because it served his purpose, because he thought he was stupid enough to believe that this was going to somehow stop the counting of the electoral votes and stop the United States Congress from doing its constitutional duty. It shows you just how stupid this man really is.
And in August of 74, when those Republican senators went to the White House and told President Nixon it was time to go, he acknowledged that, as you say, and he knew it was time to go, and he did go. As George says, there is no contrition here. We saw it again yesterday. For the first time, he had the opportunity in front of a group of cameras on his way down to Texas, getting on Air Force One to turn down the temperature and speak to his voters. He offered no contrition whatsoever. He said, my speech before that rally was totally appropriate. He called this a witch hunt again, the election that was fairly decided for Joe Biden, a witch hunt somehow, and said it's getting very dangerous. Again, another signal to the people who rushed the Capitol and may have plans for the inauguration. Jim VandeHei, on the question of Republicans, on the question of Mitch McConnell, we're hearing reports that maybe 20 people, as Jonathan Martin said, are open to voting for conviction in the Senate, 20 Republicans. Mitch McConnell doesn't leak a lot, and we heard a lot out of his office yesterday through the New York Times and other sources that say he believes the House is doing the right thing, going after impeachment for the President of the United States. Maybe that gives Republicans some cover here. Do you think that when impeachment passes through the House today, and it will later, there's a chance that still that Senate, led by Republicans, will vote to convict?
There's a hell of a bigger chance today than there was 24 hours ago. Last night, McConnell's people were telling Mike Allen that there's a better than 50-50 chance that McConnell himself would vote to convict and remove Trump from office, remove him from politics forevermore. It would be one of the most unprecedented votes, one of the most stunning votes really in the history of our republic. And he doesn't do things by accident. He is sending a signal. Liz Cheney is sending a signal that you have one chance to be able to take a vote quickly and remove Trump from politics and the party forever. And if you don't, you're betting that it's going to be his own undoing that would unfold over time. And I think Mitch McConnell understands the Republican base. It's different than an elected Republican, especially in leadership. The base, for the most part, based on the polling we're seeing so far, and a lot of the email that we're getting and you're getting, a lot of those people are still with Donald Trump. And so Mitch McConnell wants people to know. And it started not yesterday. It started when his wife left the cabinet. He was part of that. And then it escalated yesterday with the Times story, and I think culminated last night in telling Mike what they told. And I think this is going to be one of the most fascinating, consequential weeks in American politics and American history.
I agree. What Willie was talking about, here's President Trump yesterday en route to the border town of Alamo, Texas, expressing no regret for his comments 1 week ago ahead of the violent insurrection at the U.S. Capitol.
What is your role in what happened at the Capitol? What is your personal responsibility?
So if you read my speech, and many people have done it, and I've seen it both in the papers and in the media, on television, it's been analyzed, and people thought that what I said was totally appropriate. Everybody to the T thought it was totally appropriate. The impeachment hoax is a continuation of the greatest and most vicious witch hunt in the history of our country, and is causing tremendous anger and division and pain, far greater than most people will ever understand, which is very dangerous for the USA, especially at this very tender time.
Yeah, that witch hunt that has expanded out, Mika. Now you have the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal that carried the president's water for much of the past 4 years, engaged in anti-Trumpism at an Olympian level, actually dismissed Donald Trump and everything regarding Russia and their interference in American democracy. And yet even the Wall Street Journal editorial page is saying that Donald Trump committed impeachable offenses. Mitch McConnell said Donald Trump has committed impeachable offenses. Liz Cheney is saying Donald Trump committed impeachable offenses. This is what happens to a liberal Democrat who spends his entire life contributing to Hillary Clinton and you name it. You just go down. You go down the list. Eliot Spitzer, Anthony Weiner. You go down the list. This is what happens when he thinks he can define what conservative is and what a rhino is. It's just shocking to me. I thought Republicans would figure this out 4.5 years ago. It actually took him committing an insurrection against the United States government to figure it out.
Look, what's staggering to me is that you have to explain all that. There is no other place in America, not in a state government, not in a local government, not at any business, and God forbid this was a Democrat, where the person wouldn't be out 24 hours later, 25th. Jonathan Lemire, what is going on in the White House? How is it that he still continues as president after assaulting our democracy?
Well, Mika, this is an extraordinary moment in our history, and it's a president who is largely alone. You heard him yesterday. He played the clip there. He has showed no remorse for what happened last week at the Capitol. And remember, of course, he had to be really cajoled, convinced to make a video statement last week in which he finally condemned the violence. Remember, on Wednesday itself, he had no words of anger, no words to his supporters to stop, even as his own vice president's life was in danger. It was only when the White House counsel told him you could be legally vulnerable here that he finally was convinced to go out there and put a statement out, only to that night ask aides if he should be regretting it, if that was a mistake, because it would anger his base. There's real alarm here, even this very small circle of aides that remain around the president about what this means. And I know Joe likes to say that he's in favor of deathbed conversions. There's a limit to how much credit Mitch McConnell should be getting for turning on Trump here in the 11th hour. But by doing so, by signaling that he is happy with the Democrats' impeachment effort, that is a big deal and could provide a lot of cover to fellow Republicans. Same with Liz Cheney. Now, McConnell was, let's be clear, didn't necessarily suggest yet that he'd be willing to vote for removal from office. But even if it's being entertained, that does change the calculus among a lot of Republicans. They're nervous inside the White House. That was what led. First, they were nervous about the 25th Amendment push, the fact that Trump and Pence had not spoken in days, Pence telling close aides he had never been angrier or more betrayed by the president's behavior. That's why Trump invited Pence to the Oval Office Monday night, to try to have some sort of peaceful meeting, to try to repair that relationship to a degree. And we did see the vice president yesterday say he wouldn't be in favor of the 25th Amendment. But now there's not an effort yet from Republicans. That's what they're going to do today from the White House, to try to reach out to Republicans to have that same sort of effort. Hey, they'll say, don't abandon our guy. And some of it is a threat. As a final point, what has been so striking here the last couple of days is the silence from the president. He would keep Republicans in line with his Twitter account. There's no Twitter account. He's not able to do that. But they are working the phones here with this threat. They're saying that President Trump remains very popular among Republicans and that he and they will remember your vote now. That if you vote to impeach or remove this president, you'll face their wrath down the road. So the question is, how much influence do we really believe this president will have once he's out of office?
Well, it really depends. I guess he'll have some influence with criminal defense attorneys. Because he's going to be shopping for a lot of criminal defense attorneys. He may actually have to spend some money and get real attorneys this time because he's in trouble. But as far as deathbed conversions go, make no mistake, friends, we are 7 days away, actually, from Donald Trump actually leaving the White House, not having access to the nuclear codes, not having the ability to cause serious harm in this country. So that hymn that you're hearing in the background, it's Just As I Am. And yes, we're open for deathbed conversions. And there is 7 days to go. Any Republican that steps forward and actually votes to impeach this president and remove him from office, I think many people would agree we are entering into, yes, the final hours of this presidency, but Mika, also perhaps the most dangerous time of this presidency.
What's with the hedging? What's with the hedging on the criminal assault on our Capitol? 5 people dead. The president, we know, everyone says, oh, this is such an unprecedented time. The president is paralyzed. The president loved it. He's a sick, unself-aware criminal.
Right.
We all know that. Turn that page.
Right.
The people around him. What's with the hedging? I don't get it. A lot can happen in 7 days.
Yep.
The acting U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C., Michael Sherwin, announced yesterday that his office is already investigating more than 170 people who were at the Capitol siege last week and looking to charge those who committed the most heinous crimes, incited by the president, by the way, with sedition.
We have already opened more than 170 subject files, meaning these individuals have been identified as potential persons that committed crimes on the Capitol grounds, inside and outside. So of those 170 cases that have already been opened, and I anticipate that's going to grow to the hundreds in the next coming weeks, we've already charged over 70 cases. Just yesterday, our office organized a strike force of very senior national security prosecutors and public corruption prosecutors. Their only marching orders from me are to build seditious and conspiracy charges related to the most heinous acts that occurred in the Capitol.
You know, Sherwin added that other strike forces are going to focus on assaults against law enforcement and the members of the media. The range of criminal conduct, he said, runs from simple trespass to felony murder. George Conway, I heard some people complaining yesterday that Ray wasn't there, that they wanted him to say more. I guess I'm just a half glass full guy because I heard him talking about sedition. I heard him talking about people being thrown in jail for 20 years. And I think if they broke into the Capitol, I think they should, if they can obviously prove that case, I think the government should do everything they could to put them away for 20 years at least. What was your take on the acting U.S. Attorney's press conference and the actions of the FBI and the Justice Department?
Yeah, I initially had the same reaction as you in terms of, well, why is it just the acting United States attorney in the District of Columbia and not the head of the criminal division or the acting attorney general? And, you know, I mean, the fact that it was the acting U.S. attorney in D.C. is just an example of the tumult and the disorder and the chaos in the Trump administration. That said, I think he did a terrific job in explaining the process and explaining the variety of crimes and the complexity involved and why it is that some people are being charged with relatively minor things just to get them arrested and just to get them in custody, but will be charged later with more serious things. And again, explaining the panoply of the wide variety of crimes that were committed here, from simple vandalism to theft of mail, to theft of electronic devices, to jeopardizing national security information, to assault and murder. So I thought he did a terrific job.
So, George, I've heard some legal scholars talk about the problem of maybe Don Jr., Rudy Giuliani, the president, being charged with inciting this riot, being part of a conspiracy for sedition. But you listen to their words. Specifically, you listen to Rudy Giuliani talking about combat justice. You listen to Don Jr. saying, "We're coming to get you," like literally an hour before the mob went up and tried to kill Nancy Pelosi and tried to kill Mike Pence. And we're finding out this morning they were only minutes away from being able to kill members of the United States Congress. How is that language not inciting violence? How could that be protected political speech when they're literally fomenting violence against members of the United States Congress?
We are not here to curse the darkness. We are here to light a candle.
I'm Chuck Rosenberg. On my podcast, The Oath, I talk with people who served with integrity and honor, men and women who light the way. This week, former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figliuzzi.
If you're all about harsh, rigorous, aggressive rules enforcement, you're not going to last very long as an organization because people will hate you for it. Your system won't have credibility. They won't report misconduct, and they won't cooperate with the core values you're trying to maintain. So with any disciplinary system, with any attempt in your family, your team, your community, your company to enforce compliance, enforce regulations and values, you better have compassion along with consequences.
Join me for Season 4 of The Oath, an MSNBC podcast. Search for The Oath wherever you're listening right now and subscribe. New episodes every Wednesday.
Well, I don't think it was, but again, as you know, as a lawyer, there are subjective and objective aspects of proving a case like that. You have to show objectively that the words were and you talked about over the last couple of days, but for causation, but there's also an aspect to causation of foreseeability. Are these reasonably foreseeable to cause this kind of mayhem and disruption and violence? And I think it is. I think, as you've been pointing out, it is. And there's also a subjective aspect of it. What did these people believe when they uttered these words? And I think to fully understand that is going to require a total and complete contextualization of all the facts, not just what we heard from the speeches at the Ellipse, but what conversations did all of these people have before? What did they read on social media or hear about? The White House, apparently, at least the political director, was involved in the events leading up to the rally, in organizing the rally, or at least the presentation of the rally. And so was Trump, apparently. What did they understand this to be? And again, it's not just what happened on January 6th. It's the entire course of conduct that fomented this violence. And Trump, talked about be there on January 6th. It's going to be wild. What did he mean by that? Well, that's the issue. That's the issue.
George, there's also, we can talk about all the different criminal acts that President Trump may or may not have participated in. Some are quite clear, from tapes with Bob Woodward to shaking down the Georgia Secretary of State on a telephone call, to what we saw play out. Yeah, everything. Go on, go on. We know. That's all there. But I want to ask you about Mike Pence. We know Trump's personality. We know what he does with people. Could he be extorting the vice president? Why in the world would the vice president at this point allow this man to stay in office and not take every step that he took in his oath to protect this country and to protect our Constitution? Why wouldn't he act?
It's absolutely mystifying to me. If Michael Pence thinks he's going to be president any other way than the 25th Amendment or impeachment, he's smoking something. He needed to do the right thing here. This man is completely unfit to hold any form of public office. He's unfit to be dog catcher. He's destructive. He's now in a mode where he's trying to seek revenge. I mean, what we've seen this week and the effective threat we saw yesterday when he said, basically, if you impeach me, people are going to be really upset. He's basically saying that, don't impeach me for fomenting violence because that would foment violence. I mean, who is he to say that? What he's been doing is essentially it's like the last days of World War II. It's like the Nero decree when Albert Speer was told to go out and destroy all the bridges. This is the threat he's making to us yesterday. That's the threat he made implicitly in Texas by saying, this is a very tender time. That, gee, that's a really nice country you have there. Be too bad if something happened to it.
Jim Vandehei, Republicans are watching all this, Jim, and they're saying this guy's got to go. We've got to be rid of him. We don't want him as a part of our party. We certainly don't want him the head of our party. Some Republicans. So they have a couple ways of going about that. They can vote to convict after impeachment passes through the House, or, as you say, they can sort of watch him fade away. But this is not a man who is likely to fade away, especially if he is still eligible to serve another term, to run again in 2024. So how is this calculus playing out at the highest reaches, at Mitch McConnell's office, Liz Cheney, but also just among rank and file Republicans who may not say it publicly, but privately would love to see Donald Trump gone for good?
There's a massive split. Listen, even in the House, while you do have Liz Cheney saying that she's going to vote for impeachment, I would be surprised if you had more than 15 or 20 House Republicans who voted for impeachment. So the vast majority are still very supportive of Donald Trump. I think the majority of the Senate is still very supportive of Donald Trump. And the reason is they're hearing from their voters and they think 70, 80, 85% of Republicans are still with Donald Trump. And I'm with you. I've always been in the camp. He's not going to fade away. There's no way that somebody who loves being in the limelight and loves power as much as him goes away. And if he has the ability to run again, he'll at least say he's going to run again. And I think that's the Mitch McConnell calculation. If you look down the road, if you're Mitch McConnell and you're trying to think about how do you save the party, if you believe, as he does and many do, that Trump would be a catastrophe in 2024 for them, you take him out now. That's the only reason, that and believing what he did in fomenting an insurrection is real. That's the reason he's doing this. He knows it's not the popular thing to do with the base. He knows it's going to put a lot of Republicans in a very tough spot. But playing the long game, that is the move that he thinks that you have to make. And I think it's a real open question about how many Republicans writ large turn against Donald Trump. We're in the field right now with a poll, and I will not be surprised if way more people than we think are supportive of Trump, don't blame Trump, blame other forces, other factors. And I think that is the reality that these Republicans are operating in. Even look at last night, what was happening in the U.S. Capitol. They tried to put in a metal detector so people couldn't bring guns into the chamber, and you had Republicans in revolt. You had a Republican. You had a Republican freshman have to go up to the Capitol Police and apologize for his Republican colleagues, pardon my language, for being assholes. That's the language that he used. And because they wouldn't go through these simple procedures. So there's a massive divide in the party. And I wish this was going to burn off soon. Unfortunately, I think you heard from the FBI earlier, these reports, I think this is going to go on for some time. And that is the jam the Republicans are in. To be honest, it's a jam we as Americans are in.
Jim Vandehei, you and I have been on the Hill, on and off the Hill for 25, 26, 27 years. Nobody ever thought about bringing a loaded gun onto the House floor until, just the last couple of weeks. You've had Republicans bragging about bringing loaded guns on the House floor. You've had other members of the Republican caucus believing in conspiracy theories and spreading conspiracy theories that Democratic leaders are cannibals, and that there is a global conspiracy to kidnap children and have a pedophile ring. And these are the people who are screaming and yelling that they shouldn't actually be scanned for having guns. There was actually a House member, I saw the clip this morning.
I was just looking for it.
Just staggering. There's actually a House member who was screaming about the real atrocity.
Yeah.
It wasn't the mob, wasn't the overthrowing, the attempt to overthrow the federal government. The real atrocity was that they couldn't bring loaded guns onto the House floor. These people
New normal?
are crazy. These people are out of their mind. These people are actually the very reason why they're having to put those metal detectors up going into the House, Jim, because you have unhinged people who want to bring loaded guns to the House floor and who believe in wild conspiracy theories. And let's also just say right now, had well over 100 of them vote to overturn a Democratic election.
Hey, it's Chris Hayes. This week on my podcast, Why Is This Happening? I'll be talking with author Ta-Nehisi Coates about the precarious nature of America's experiment in multiracial democracy.
This picture that we paint of ourselves as this oldest democracy, hallowed institutions, etc., it really doesn't match. And if you understand that this isn't, the first attempted coup in American history, why is this shocking? The inability to picture, frankly, a group of white people overrunning the Capitol is a lack of acquaintance with American history in and of itself.
That's this week on Why Is This Happening? Search for Why Is This Happening wherever you're listening right now and subscribe.
Yeah, you had to impose, and yesterday they had to impose a new rule that you're going to get fined if you don't wear your mask on the House floor. Like simple things that virtually every scientist in the world says that you should do for the good of your people. You have people refusing to do. There was a fight last night via text among the House Republican freshmen that we reported about, where there's an argument about QAnon and how wacky it is. And QAnon is like this weird conspiracy where there's a satanic deep state trying to take out the Republicans and take out Trump. And yet there's elected people who believe this stuff. And so that toxicity, that's the thing like that worries me, is that I just think this lingers for a long time. There's so many people. I probably got 300 emails over the weekend, of which 30% were from Trump supporters. So some of them very thoughtful notes, but at the end they're like, I think the election was a fraud. I think Trump gets screwed. And I think that's where most of the Republican Party is. That's how they've been programmed by Trump and Trump media organs to think. And it doesn't go away. I think we sometimes look at this like a political movement. And I think you're better off studying things like Scientology, where things become like a religion to people, where when you have that type of fervency, things that you and I might not think people could ever believe, they suddenly believe. And it's going to take a long time for this to burn out. Like even if Mitch McConnell now has a profile in courage after sitting with Donald Trump for 4 years, that doesn't mean that the rest of the party is. The rest of the party has been much more closely aligned with Donald Trump. The Donald Trump party, I still think, is much more powerful than the Republican Party. And by the way, outside of the U.S. Senate, most people don't know who Mitch McConnell is or don't care who Mitch McConnell is. And most Republicans going back 4 to 10 years, they hate the establishment. They hate almost everything about like the power. They hate media. They hate big government, often are now turning against big business. And so that's the reality that Republicans are going to have to sift through for years and years to come.
All right, Jim VandeHei, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. And Willie, yes, the overwhelming majority of Republicans still do most likely support Donald Trump. I suppose that there's a growing number who are deeply concerned about what happened last week. I think it is also important to note that while we're talking about Republican members who want to bring guns on to the House floor, I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans who are also horrified by that. I saw a video last night of some red cap wearing supporters of Donald Trump. They were in the minority, but they were pushing people away from the police, trying to actually protect the police as other crowds were moving for them. So you can't paint an entire crowd, an entire movement with one brush, but you can say that there are enough radicals, enough extremists, enough anti-Americans who want to overturn the election results and who wanted to storm the Capitol and who committed sedition, that these precautions, these basic precautions, have to be put in place so members are not gunned down on the House floor.
Yeah, and there's a rule, as you know, Joe, you cannot have a gun on the floor of the House. That's it. You can have your handgun on the Capitol complex.
No question.
You cannot bring a gun on the floor of the House. And so that just shows you what we talked about yesterday, Joe. And I know some people raised their eyebrows at it, but it turned out to be true, which is that there are members of Congress who were concerned about a certain group, particularly the QAnon supporting new members of Congress, being threats to the leadership, being threats to other members of Congress, being threats to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at the inauguration. Those metal detectors go up yesterday and proved that, in fact, that was true. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the congresswoman from New York, said last night on Instagram she was afraid during the attack on the Capitol last Wednesday to go to the safe room, to go to the place where she was supposed to be protected, because she was worried as a high-profile member of Congress that those QAnon-supporting Republicans would let the rioters and attackers know that she was in there. So that's the vibe. That's the energy. And freshman Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado, she's been boasting, as you know, about carrying a gun in the Capitol. She reportedly refused to turn over her bag to Capitol Police after she walked through the metal detector, which sounded. She eventually was led into the House floor to vote, though it's unclear how Capitol Police resolved the matter. That was yesterday. Congresswoman Boebert tweeted about the new restrictions in part, quote, "Metal detectors outside of the House would not have stopped the violence we saw last week. It's just another political stunt by Speaker Pelosi." Another Republican congressman, Rodney Davis of Illinois, reportedly told Capitol Hill officers, quote, "This is BS." Republican Congressman Steve Scalise criticized House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, saying the changes were, quote, "never discussed with the House minority." Arizona Congresswoman Debbie Lesko went further in her criticism, tweeting, "These new provisions include searches and being wanted like criminals. We now live in Pelosi's communist America." Again, this is because there was a threat of carrying weapons onto the floor of the House chamber, and they put in metal detectors. Greg Steube, a Republican congressman from Florida, called the metal detectors an atrocity, saying, quote, "Take note, America. This is what you have to look forward to in the Joe Biden administration." Meanwhile, Democrat Rashida Tlaib of Michigan tweeted this: "Just had to go through a metal detector before entering the House floor. Some colleagues are frustrated, guess which ones, by this requirement. Now they know how high school students in my district feel. Suck it up, Buttercup," she wrote. "Y'all brought this on yourselves." So, Joe, we're seeing much more passion. We're seeing much more energy. We're seeing much more protest about metal detectors outside the House chamber than about the massive attack on the Capitol last Wednesday from some members.
And if these Republicans who are talking about how they want to carry guns onto the House floor want to understand why that scares people, I read from a September the 4th, 2020 article. GOP candidate poses with rifle, says she's targeting socialist congresswomen. A House candidate whom President Trump recently called a future Republican star posted an image of herself holding a rifle with photos of 3 liberal congresswomen of color and vowed to, quote, "go on the offense against members of the squad, an unprecedented threat against lawmakers from a probable future colleague," and that was Marjorie Taylor Greene. So that person who held a gun in a fundraising letter and had photos of 3 others members of Congress and was targeting them is now a member of Congress. And anybody wonders, Mika, why they've got to put up security outside of that? I mean, if the Republicans are angry at the wrong people.
Let me explain.
The Republicans need to be angry at members of their own caucus.
Correct.
That have brought this radicalism and this sedition into the chamber.
This is such a distraction. This is ridiculous. They're trying to make the Capitol safe after an insurrection. And I mean, Jonathan Lemire, Let's just read what happened from, say, Liz Cheney. Much more will become clear in the coming days, but what we know is enough. The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of the attack on the Capitol in the past week. None of this would have happened without the president. The president could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence at the Capitol. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by a president of the United States of his office and his oath to the Constitution. I will vote to impeach the president. Stay focused, people. Jonathan Lemire, your thoughts.
Well, first of all, Representative Cheney certainly laid out the case extraordinarily well there. And in fact, Democratic aide told me last night that was better than some Democrats have done in terms of why President Trump is such an existential threat right now to the nation and why he needs to be impeached and removed. And let's remember, this siege on the Capitol, even though it feels like we've been living with it for a long time, it hasn't even been fully a week yet since it happened. And last night, the fact that these metal detectors were placed outside the House floor and that a number of Republican congressmen and women fought them. That, mind you, this is the Capitol Police that lost now 2 of its own members last week and in the aftermath of the siege. And yet there were Republican representatives pushing them, shoving them, ignoring them, storming through the metal detectors. We have Steve Scalise, who, mind you, was shot on a baseball field a few years ago, adding his voice to the protests. And let's be clear, let me underscore what Willie said, and the Democratic aide said this to me as well. The reason why these metal detectors are there, plainly, is because there's a fear among leadership that if there was another insurrection, if there was another violent assault in the Capitol, they couldn't trust some members of the Republican Congress to not side with the insurrectionists, to not pull out their weapon and fire off. So that is the concern here. That's why that's there. And also we should point this out in terms of safety of representatives. There have now been multiple cases of Democratic lawmakers who have come down with the coronavirus, who have tested positive for COVID-19 after being in a bunker with their Republican colleagues who refused to wear masks during that siege of the Capitol last week. That is what is at play here. And yet those are the people, those representatives, yes, they're the ones still loyal to the president. And the White House aides, Mika, to your point, they have their own internal polling. So let's take that with a slight grain of salt, where they see that the president's numbers are still high among Republicans, but they have slipped some. This is a president who was up in the upper 80s, even pushing 90. Now he's dropped. He's dropped down to the lower 80s, upper 70s. That's still a big number, but it does show an erosion of support. And right now, the calculation made by Mitch McConnell and others in the Republican leadership is if there is ever a moment to try to rid themselves of Trump and his followers, this is the one. Doesn't mean it's going to work. It doesn't mean he's going to go away. But that is what they're trying to do right now, is trying to make a stand and make a decision. How do they want to be remembered? What do they want for the future of their party? And how do they want to be remembered by history?
George, what a damning snapshot of the modern Republican Party last night, as Jonathan just described it, which is that you had new members of Congress, sitting members of Congress, screaming at Capitol Hill police officers, shoving them in some cases because they had to simply walk through a metal detector to ensure they weren't carrying a weapon onto the floor of the House chamber. Again, those are the same officers 6 days earlier who may have saved all of their lives by forming a line as those seditionists stormed into the United States Capitol.
It's absurd, the notion that these people can't walk through magnetometers and can't wear masks without complaining. It's beyond absurd, though. It's hypocritical. Think of it. These people purported to come to Washington to make Washington to eliminate special privileges for the governing class. And what do? The rest of us have to go through magnetometers and pat downs when we go into any federal building in America and in most state buildings. And yet they think they should be exempt from that, even though they were basically part of what caused an insurrection against the very building in which they work. It's just so ridiculous.
And can you imagine, Mika, going to work every morning with coworkers who have sent around an image of you with them holding a gun and coworkers saying, "I'm coming after Mika. I've got a gun. I'm coming after Mika." And you would have to go in and sit in the same office with that person. And if you decided that you needed some security and going into that office, since this person had actually said while holding a gun that she was targeting you, and there are other people that have been talking that way throughout the 2020 election, that her friends would be angry. This is not even a close call. And Republicans that are whining about this, let me tell you something.
You got bigger problems.
You need to take it up in your House Republican caucus meeting, because that's where the problem is.
Trump Republicans have now created a new normal on Capitol Hill, that you come to work and you could get shot or COVID. Thanks. Conservative lawyer and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, George Conway, thank you. And coming up on Morning Joe, we'll be joined by two Democratic lawmakers ahead of today's House impeachment vote. Majority Leader Steny Hoyer and Congresswoman Val Demings, who served as an impeachment manager during President Trump's first trial. You're watching Morning Joe. We'll be right back.
Hi, it's MSNBC's Hayes Brown. You know, these days there's just so much news to wrap your head around, it's challenging to get a deeper understanding of things. So every morning, go beyond the headlines with MSNBC Daily. It features written perspectives from people you know and trust, including Trymaine Lee, Mehdi Hasan, Liz Plank, and Frank Figliuzzi. They'll take you inside the most important issues of our times. Issues like systemic racism, domestic terrorism, and how we can bridge our political divide. Plus, you'll get a fresh take every morning from me. Start your day with MSNBC Daily at msnbc.com.